Hello. So there seems to be just more and more options if you're thinking about buying an electric car. And so I thought I would just talk through if you've got a family and you're thinking about buying a big car, then what are your options? This was actually prompted by relatives who've got children and they've started looking for EVs. And we've got a hatchback EV ourselves. And so I was interested to talk to them about it. And I'm someone who just wastes all my time looking up EV reviews and things like that. I'm a bit of an EV geek. I have no idea why, but I just thought I'd share all of the different options that there are now because I wanted to highlight that there's kind of differences between them, and not all EVs are the same. So it's useful to kind of bear these things in mind. And so when I was thinking about this for my relatives, I thought, well, maybe you could break down the options into different categories, and maybe that would be a useful thing to do. So I thought I'd do that for them, and I thought I'd make a video about it. So what is it that they want? They want a car that can go on fairly long journeys. So they want to visit relatives who are about, I can't remember, maybe 180 miles away or something like that. So that's a bit beyond the range of the sort of standard range EVs like ours, which could maybe do that in the summer without a problem, but in the winter, batteries require heating, and so you use up some of the energy to heat up the battery. So they're looking for the often the long range option, where you've got a type of car that has a kind of a standard and a long range. They're going to be looking at the longer range option of those. And some cars, they don't even really have a longer range option. They've just got one option, and maybe that won't be enough for this particular family. And it's got to have a lot of space. So I'm just looking at kind of big cars, SUVs, and that sort of thing. And I've put in this extra feature as well. And this was the problem with the very early EVs. They didn't have rapid charging. So this is where you can plug it into a DC charger, not the kind of AC charger that you have maybe in your driveway or a lamppost or in your street or something like that. These are DC power chargers, which puts the power straight into the battery. They can be much faster. So that's the sort of like the equivalent of using a petrol pump, essentially. Like when you're out and about, you want it to be relatively quick. So that's the thing that all EVs have got now, pretty much. But the early ones, some of those little ones that came out 20 years ago, they only really charged from like a plug kind of thing. That's what you need. That's something to bear in mind, I think. If not for you, then at least for when you come to sell it, the person buying it's going to want this feature. They're going to want to be able to go on long trips with it. And so what I'm doing is I'm now looking, it's the very end of September 2025 here in the UK. And so I'm looking at our big website for car adverts, secondhand cars, which is called Auto Trader. So yeah, obviously the prices will change. I'm just going to pick out a particular example or two of each kind of car. Those ones will go quickly and other ones will come available. So the cheap ones might go, whatever. I'm not guaranteeing prices or anything like that. I'm just telling you what the market is like at this particular point in time. And generally, as cars get older, they're going to get cheaper, aren't they? That's usually how it goes, except maybe if there's a pandemic or something like that. Another thing is that I think that EVs are very cheap secondhand, and that means that they're really good value because there's so many scare stories about them. So I think once people realize that actually these batteries are very long lasting, you can save an absolute fortune from having an EV. If you've got your own place to charge it at home, you can charge it up for sort of £5 or £6. You know, that much petrol, might cost you 30 or £40. I haven't checked the numbers, but there's a reason why people are going electric for just purely financial reasons, and that's something that my family members mentioned actually, although they've got solar panels now and things like that. So there's the environmental benefits, obviously, are huge, but then there's just the fact that it's so much cheaper to run an electric vehicle. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is look for the cheapest example of each model. So I'll just pick out loads of models that I'm grouping together into categories, and I'll just find the cheapest sort of reasonable one that's available that's not got anything weird about it. So what you have to bear in mind then is that because, prices rapidly decline for cars as they get older and older, if a model was released quite a while ago, then it's had longer to sort of reduce its price. So if I'm finding the oldest one of a particular car, then we're not necessarily comparing the same kind of thing if the oldest version of a particular car is only 6 months, because the car only came out 6 months ago. So that's something to bear in mind, that some of these cars that are currently pretty expensive because they've only been out a few months, in a couple of years' time, they'll be the same sort of price as the other cars. But in general, yeah, just bear in mind the older models, the ones that have been around longer, I'm going to find cheaper ones of, aren't I? So that's basically what's often going on here. So how have I grouped these together then? And I've come up with 7 categories, would you believe? And I don't think you should probably consider all of them. So it's a case of for you, it's a very personal decision about a car. What do you need? What do you like? There's the question of, what it looks like from the outside. There's the question of what it feels like inside. What are your particular, preferences for buttons and screens and all these different things about a car that are going to drive you. So that's why I'm giving pretty much, all of the options, but I'm grouping them together so that you can narrow it down quite easily. So my first category is older style models that I've called budget models. These are the ones because they've been around quite a long time, I'm calling this budget because these are great value. So let's give some examples then here from Auto Trader. So here it is. So you can see obviously you've got older models which had slow charging and small batteries. They're available for sort of less than £2,000, mostly Nissan Leafs. That's all great, but these aren't going to be suitable for our criteria. So let's have a look at some examples. So the first one I'm going to mention to you, one that's been around a long time, is the Kia e-Niro. So let's see. You can get a Kia e-Niro about 7.5 to £8,000. I thought I'd excluded the category. So if it's been an accident, we're not looking at those ones. So look here, you've got one. It says higher price because it's got mega miles. That's not such a problem for EVs as it might be for petrol cars where you'll wear the engine out. But obviously, yeah, that is a hell of a lot of miles for a car. So it might be starting to get a bit worn out. If you're a low mileage driver, that could be great for you. But this one's a bit more like normal mileage. It's still high mileage, 144,000. So yeah, £7,500. An e-Niro is quite a reasonably sized family car, EV, very cheap to run. What are the other ones then we could put in this kind of category of your budget cars? Kia options, you've got the Soul. Some of those had big batteries. So you're looking at some Souls, sort of 8 to £9,000 if they've got quite a lot of miles on them, maybe 9 or 10,000 miles if they're a bit more reasonable for the mileage. Bit boxy for my liking, but that could be all right for you. It might be a small boot if you've got a big family. It might not be perfect for this exact situation. What other brands are there? So Kia are part of the Hyundai group, and Hyundai have the Kona, which is like a smaller version of the Kia e-Niro. Again, this is sort of like 8,000 to £9,000, 8,500 if you get a fairly high mileage one, £9,500 here for one. On the face of it, this looks perfectly reasonable. So well-regarded cars. Another one I'll put in this category is the MG ZS. And so, yes, again, some of these had big batteries in them. So here you've got one that's 9,200. Here they're sort of more like 10 to 11,000. So it just depends when you look what's available. But this is, a lot of battery, pretty reasonable size car, will probably do the job for a lot of families. So what are the pros and cons then of this kind of category of cars that I've come up with? They're about sort of 8, 9, £10,000. Obviously, it's the price. You're looking at these budget models. These are the cheapest ones we're looking at. These cars have been around 3, 4, 5 years. They're not the latest models, and so the price has come down. The cons of them are they don't rapid charge particularly fast compared to the more recent cars. So you're probably looking somewhere between 50 and 80 kilowatts as your kind of rapid charging speed. That would have been good, 10 years ago, but now that seems a bit slow compared to the ones that are around now. And also, what you might have noticed is that these are cars you've seen around with kind of petrol versions. And so you might say, well, these are just kind of cars that they made petrol versions and hybrid versions and EV versions of them. So it's not really designed to be an EV. It's maybe not quite as much as those like e-Golfs and e-Focuses and things where they really did just take a petrol car and take out the engine and stuff some batteries in there. But it's a little bit like that, isn't it? This is a car that wasn't designed as just an EV. So it's a little bit like a petrol car with EV stuff shoved into it. But people have these cars and swear by them. and think they're great. So if you just want a budget EV that's big enough for a family, then these are perfectly good options, I would say. And then a second category that I'll throw out there is cars that I'm calling long-standing, but they're a bit more advanced than those budget ones that I mentioned. So these are models that were the sort of the first ones that came out that were really sort of were specialist EV models, but they were more high end, really, and so I think that a great option is the Ioniq 5, and this is a real kind of design classic. And because they've been around for a while now, you can get these for sort of here's one for £13,000. A lot of them are sort of 15 to 16,000. So these are sort of like 3 or 4 years old. These cars, they're very expensive cars, but they're a few years old now. New cars have come along, and so yeah, so bargains to be had here, definitely. Other cars that you might put in this sort of category, Ford had their Mustang. It's a bit like a sort of a sports car SUV. It's very unusual, so maybe it would be big enough for a family because it's a fairly big car. And again, you're looking at sort of 15,000 here. There's a few less than that, a few that are more sort of £16,000, 4 years old car, EV, absolutely fine. Also in this category, if I can find it, the Skoda Enyaq has been around a while now. So you're starting to get, good prices out there. Look at this, £12,000 for a car with a pretty big battery. And so this is one of the first cars that came out on the Volkswagen MEB platform. And the other one from that platform that was one of the first ones to come out was the Volkswagen ID4. And they're not exactly universally loved, but look at this, £10,000 you can get a 4-year-old ID4 car for. So that's got a big battery, essentially. You're buying a lot of battery for £10,000. That seems like a very good deal to me. So, what then are the pros and cons of this kind of category? So, unlike those first ones, these ones were built to be EVs, and they would have been quite expensive, new, as I was saying, but they've lost lots of value. So people complain about, oh, EVs lose loads of value. Well, that's great if you want to buy a second-hand one, isn't it? Particularly because they're so cheap to run. And where they have the advantage over those budget models, maybe they're a bit better looking often and things like that, but they rapid charge at faster speeds as well. So they generally 100 plus, a little bit over 100 kilowatts they can take on that, motorway side refuel stop that you need to do. They're not necessarily the most efficient EVs compared to some of them, but and I probably should put another pro on here as well, that these are good brands, aren't they? They're well respected brands. So I probably, if it was me, I'd be looking at these ones really. As I say, it's all down to personal preference. Maybe you might want a newer car as well. Obviously, these ones are available newer as well. So if you wanted a newer one, I guess you could then put this into one of those other categories, and you might rule out these older examples of these cars. Okay, and then the third category is what I'm calling older premium. And so these are also ones that have been around a while now, but they're sort of brands that are generally, considered to be quite sort of fancy or whatever. So examples of this would be the Audi e-tron, the original Audi EV. It's confusing because they use e-tron for all of them. There's a little sports kind of e-tron one. This is more of like the SUV style e-tron. Some of them have got huge batteries in them. So there, look, you've got one for 15,000, you've got one for 16,000, one for just under 18,000. So you might be able to find a good value one of these if you look around. Other premium brands, you've got BMW, the iX3. So this is a little bit like a case of you kind of put a battery bit into your same car that you make a petrol version of. These ones pretty big battery, not quite as big as that last one, but 80 kilowatt hours is quite a big battery, and you're looking sort of £17,000 for one of those if you particularly want to have a BMW. And there's other BMW models as well. The iX, let's see what that would be, maybe 24,000 for one of those, but maybe it hasn't been around quite so long, that one. Mercedes is another premium brand, isn't it? So you've got the EQ brand cars. There's the EQA. If this would be big enough for a family, maybe it's not the biggest. It's sort of 14, 15,000 pounds for one of those. They would have cost loads of money new. If you want a bit bigger, you've got the EQB, 23,000, 22,000 there. It's a bit more boxy, that one. Other brands that are a bit more sort of premium, you've got the Volvo. Let's see, you've got the XC40 here, and they're about 17, 16, 17,000 pounds for one of those. Different battery sizes, but those are pretty big batteries there. Another brand is Genesis. So that's the sort of the premium version of Hyundai that I was talking about before with the Ioniq 5. So you get this GV60. Again, it might not be huge, this one, in terms of the size of the car. So it might not be big enough for all families, but you're looking at sort of, oh, there's one for 19,000 here, 21 and a half, 22 sort of thousand seems to be common price for these. 22,000. So this is like Hyundai, but a bit more fancy inside and that sort of thing, and maybe a bit more fancy looking outside. Tesla, it's difficult to know. Tesla are a bit of their own thing, aren't they? Are they a premium brand? They sort of want to be, but then they can be quite good value as well. They're also much more efficient, and you get the Tesla supercharger network as well. Not all of those are available to people who don't have Teslas, so you get a lot more charging options, and it's very cheap charging for the Tesla chargers compared to other ones. There's one here which is high mileage, that's 15, there's less than 15,000. Another one that's maybe not quite so high mileage, but fairly high mileage. I think this is fine in terms of the battery, this kind of mileage, 17,500. So he's sort of looking 17, 18,000. So let's think about the pros and cons then. You've got a bit of the badge recognition if you particularly care about badge, or you just think it's going to be easier to sell a car if it's got a badge that people recognize. These are cars that are kind of known for their quality, I suppose. So you hope that they're going to try and put that into their EVs as well. Their rapid charging speeds tends to be pretty good for these premium brands as well. And they were really expensive new, but if you're looking now, sort of looking 15,000 or something like that, that's a huge amount of depreciation. So someone else has taken that hit, and now you're coming along and getting the car at a more sort of affordable amount. As I say, Teslas are very efficient, but the other ones, these cars often aren't efficient. They're often quite heavy sort of cars because I guess all the luxury stuff they've put in there. So and they're not always prioritizing keeping things cheap for people because it's for rich people, isn't it? And then maybe you're thinking, well, am I just paying a bit more for the badge? Is it an extra sort of 5 or 10,000 pounds over those other ones I was talking about, just because it's got a fancier badge on it? So that's a question for everyone to think about. How much do you care about the brand and the badge and that sort of thing? And thinking about brands and badges, I've created a fourth category here, which is for more recent cars. So more recent cars are going to be more expensive, aren't they? They haven't had 4 or 5 years to depreciate. But I'm calling these budget, even though they're newer ones, because they are very cheap for a newer car. And generally speaking, what I'm talking about here is Chinese brands. So if you look at BYD, they're a Chinese brand here. The Atto 3 is a sort of medium SUV sort of car. There's a 60 kilowatt hour version, which is the longer range one, maybe not the biggest battery of all these cars we're looking at. Some of them are much bigger than this, but this is reasonably big. And, you're looking at 19,000 or so, maybe 20,000 for a second-hand car that's then only maybe a year and a half old. So these are much lower mileage. These are nearly new cars, really. Certainly for me, who's always bought very old cars until recently, this seems quite new. So yeah, so then you're looking at paying not much more for a car that's a few years older. So this is why I'm calling them budget. And these are Chinese companies. They're really trying to come into this market. So they're able to do this quite cheaply. Maybe they're subsidized by the Chinese state or something like that, and we're getting cheap cars as a result. However you want to think about it. So I'm just looking through at some of these Chinese brands. What other Chinese brands are there? They might not all be Chinese. These could be just ones you haven't heard of from other countries like South Korea or something like that. This one, 30,000 for a KGM Torres. That's like aggressive sort of looking thing, isn't it? Leapmotor, they're coming out with new cars all the time. They're linked to Stellantis. This is a sort of an estatey SUV thing. It might be big enough for some people. This is quite a new car, so it's more like 30,000. MG. MG are actually a British brand, but obviously they've been taken over by a Chinese state company, a massive company, SAIC. So I could have put this in a category later on, but I think people maybe are a bit more aware that although they've got British heritage and they still do some design work and things in Britain, they're very much Chinese cars. So this is the recent MG, the MG S5. This one's got 10 miles on. It's 22,000. This one's got 100 miles. These are just sat in the dealers, but it's a pre-registered car, so it's the registration from a month or so ago. So it's not the very latest registration plate on it, but it's not really been driven by anyone else. So it's basically a new car, SUV, pretty decent sized battery for £22,000. So if you want it newer, then this is going to appeal to you, isn't it? Another one is the Skywell, the BE11. Don't know anything about this car, but it's 22,500 for one with 10,000 miles on. So less than a year old, or maybe exactly a year old at the most. 24,000 for one that's only got 5,000 miles on it. So it's probably a form of demonstration car. This has got a massive battery. And here's another one of these Chinese brands that no one had heard of until the last year or so. Amoda. And so look, you can get these Amodas for like 19 to 20,000. Again, they're pre-reg, they come from the dealership, but the dealer, used them as a demonstrator or something like that. So they were registered a little while ago, but they've not really been driven much. Maybe they sat in the showroom or they got used by the dealership for some reason. And it's sort of like less than £20,000 for this massive car. So then what are the pros and cons of these? Well, obviously the big pro is these are virtually new cars. Chinese cars actually tend to have pretty good technology in them. Chinese consumers do like to have sort of screens and things like that, so they tend to be pretty good for that. Prices, as we're seeing, you're buying a much newer car for a similar sort of price essentially than some of these older ones. And so yeah, so I think maybe part of the reason why they're not always selling that quickly is because people haven't heard of the brands. But actually, we've got a Chinese car. It's perfectly well built. The cons are that, a lot of people haven't heard of these brands. So if you come to sell it on, you might struggle. People won't know what it is. So it might hit the resale value. Obviously, if you're buying one second hand, then you can kind of take advantage of that essentially, can't you? They're not necessarily the fastest rapid charging speeds. I think in China, this isn't such a big selling point for cars, but they are a little bit faster than those older budget models that I was talking about at the start. So they've got that going for them. So the cons really for these are, it's about the brand, isn't it? That's the concern that people have. And then the next category I'll mention is the massive one, basically. And this is the fact that now pretty much every car manufacturer has got their own car that's come out. I didn't know whether to put some of these in which category. So an example of this is the ID4 I mentioned before. There's also an ID5. So it's basically the same kind of car, but it's got a slightly different shape to it. It looks a bit more sporty. This one's been around slightly less time than the ID4, but it's been around a few years now. So it could have gone into that other category, and you get these for about 17,000 to 20,000. So this was one that I wasn't sure what category to put in. And another one that I wasn't sure what category to put it in because it's been around a little time is the Nissan Aria. So let's see how long of these. There's one here that's 72. So it's nearly 3 years old, this car now. So it's in that kind of midpoint between them. So this is 22,000 for this one. So actually, I thought these might have dropped more than they have, but it's got a huge battery, look, 87 kilowatt hour. And essentially, this is the same car as the Renault. So there's a lot of these cars, they're the same kind of underneath as another one from related brands. So obviously the Volkswagen ones, the Seat is the same, but also as we'll see in a second, the Fords are the same. Some of these Fords are Volkswagens underneath, and the Nissan is kind of the same underneath as this Renault Scenic E-Tech, the bigger battery version here. That's 25,000, 26,000. So that's another one in this kind of category. That car is much newer though. That's only 1 year old. So this one hasn't been around for as long as the Aria. It's the same sort of technology. And so I mentioned that there's other ones that have got the same underneath. Another one in this category is the Ford Explorer. This one's about 26,000, boxy Ford thing, and it's the same kind of battery and everything as the ID4 and the ID5, and also the Ford Capri, which is an even newer, again, like the ID5, it's more sort of like a sporty shape for a giant car. These ones, look, this is just 6,000 miles on these. They're a year old. They've probably just been used as demonstration cars or something like that. Or someone's just had them for a year for some reason. 29,000 to 30,000 for a fairly new Ford Capri. And then another one where there's lots of cars that use the same underneath and they just put their own particular design on top of it is Stellantis. They're a big car company with loads and loads of brands that have just been brought into the fold over the time. Yeah, so their big one is called the Vauxhall Grandland, if it's a Vauxhall. This one is less than 400 miles, £28,000, 29,000 if you get one with a few thousand miles on it. So it's a massive car, quite a big battery. It's kind of like the same as the Peugeot E3008. This is the one. This one, 24,000 pounds for this car. If you like your car with, usually they've got small steering wheels, the Peugeots, a bit more sporty than some of the other Stellantis brands. But this is what Stellantis do. They're copying from GM from 100 years ago, where they were like, oh, we'll have different names for the different brands, and they'll each make their own version, and they'll be different. And oh yeah, another one of these I forgot for the Volkswagen is that Cupra now have their version of the ID4. And Cupras tend to be much more sort of sporty looking and aggressive looking and that sort of thing. Yeah, so again, 28 to 29,000 pounds for these Cupra Tavascans, they're called. Another one where there's two with the same is the Subaru Solterra, and that you can get these for 20,000. This one that's a couple of years old, 22,000, 23,000 for the Subaru, and this is the Subaru version of the Toyota BZ4X. So it makes sense to Toyota this name. Less than 20,000 now for some of these. BZ4X is 21,000. Fairly big battery, viable car. Toyota very slow with EVs because they don't have much charging in Japan. So the Japanese companies aren't very good at these things. And yeah, Kia I mentioned earlier in the budget section, but they've now got a range of cars coming out. So I'll mention this Kia EV3. Gets great reviews. One of my neighbors has got one, sort of 27,000 at the moment, less than that for this massive battery. Well, they've done a lot of miles in this car. It's only a few months old and it's got 14,500 miles on it. That's nothing for the size of the battery. But yeah, that's yeah, 29,000 for this very efficient, very modern EV. And then another brand that I can mention here. Oh, I forgot about Polestar. Maybe that was should have been in one of those other categories before. Wow, yeah, you get a Polestar 2. Not the biggest car, but 15,000. Don't know what category that should go in actually within my categories. But what I was going to mention was Mini. Mini is a brand that BMW into a modern giant brand, everyone bigger than the last. So yeah, you can get the Countryman. So it's a Mini, but it's massive. So not really Mini anymore. 28, 29,000 for one of those. If you particularly, there was loads in this category. As you can see, there's loads of EVs now. And these ones are newer models compared to those earlier ones that I mentioned. They're generally pretty fast charging for the rapid charging, so 100 kilowatts or more, but they're more expensive because they're newer cars, right? They haven't been around long enough to have old versions of them. Like some of them have been around a couple of years, but maybe not quite as long as some of those cheaper ones that I was talking about before. And I thought I'd mention an extra category that I've created here for a couple of Japanese brands who, as I say, Japanese brands, apart from Nissan with their Leaf, they've been very bad at doing EVs generally. So Honda have come up with this ENY1 car. It's got a pretty big battery, but it is really, really slow at charging. And so that's a bit of a problem. If you want to go on a long trip, you're going to have to wait a long time for this thing to charge up. I mean, to be honest, we hardly ever rapid charge our car. We've got a small battery. we don't have to rapid charge it that much. We just charge it at home and it does enough for us most of the time. But our car would charge faster than this one. And the other one on this is actually a luxury brand. So Lexus have EVs, various EVs, but they've got this UX Lexus. It's maybe a mid-size one, a little bit sort of a little bit SUV. It's got a big battery, probably does a decent range if you fill it all the way up. But if you try and charge it by the side of the motorway, it's going to take you forever because it's so slow at charging. So it's like a third of the speed of most EVs. So I don't know what they're thinking with that. Obviously, the best they could manage at the time when they developed them. What's this one? And this is the Lexus RZ. So this is actually the version of that Toyota I was talking about earlier. So I should have put this one in there. That's 29,000. So you could get 30,000. You get the Lexus version of those ones. Okay, so I just thought I'd mention these because you might think, oh, I know Honda. I've always had Hondas, or I know Lexus, a really high quality car, and that's what you'll get with these. But just bear in mind that these charge really slowly compared to other cars, and so that might impact your resale value when you come to sell it. And people think, well, hang on a minute, this isn't good for me. But maybe this is all right for you if you just want to go somewhere. It can go quite far if you can just charge it up when you get there. Say you've got a relative who's a certain distance away and they've got a charger, and you can just charge it overnight when you get there, charge it up while you're staying with them, and then just drive back again. Doesn't really matter for you that it's not a car that does particularly fast kind of motorway charging. So might be perfectly fine for some people. So loads of options basically is what I wanted to emphasize here. And so it's really personal choice that it comes down to. Check out all the cars, the idea is that by putting them into these categories, I'm helping you to kind of narrow it down a bit. Do you want one that's 4 years old and therefore cheaper for that reason? Do you want one that's Chinese and therefore cheaper for that reason? And then, try them out. What kind of seats do you like? What kind of interior things do you like? All those kind of things that are more personal to you, you can think about. But I thought at the end I'd say, which one would I get? I'm not in this market myself because I don't have kids, so I'm not looking at such a big car. But I can't help but notice that ID4 and the Ionic 5 really, are so much cheaper than when they came out. And when they came out, they were, quite a big deal in the sense that these were, quite fast charging, quite stylish EVs. So I think I'd be looking at those ones, but also I've got an MG myself, and so if I needed extra space, I might just look for the bigger version of the car I've already got for that. But as I say, I'm just giving you the list. I'm not actually making this decision. This decision comes down to you. So I hope that helps you kind of make sense of EVs because they are cars, they've got wheels and, you push the accelerator and it goes. They're better in lots of ways. They don't pollute out the back of them is a big one. So they're much better for the environment, much nicer to drive. They don't vibrate. They're much easier to maintain because there's no combustion engine that's trying to sort of destroy itself through vibrations and that sort of thing. They're much more efficient. Just loads of benefits to going electric. I mentioned at the start the fact that it's just much cheaper to fill it up at home, just using your own electricity that you have anyway. So yeah, I do recommend going electric, but there are certain things you still need to think about. What do I need this car to do? And if you need to go quite a long journey, then you might want one that has a bit more range or that has faster charging or that has both. So if you want the car that is fine for just driving around locally, then you can get away with a smaller battery and you don't need to worry about the faster charging so much. If this is maybe your main car for longer journeys, then you're probably looking at those kind of factors as well. So there's some terminology you need to learn. That there's great explainers for those things. You need to get used to getting your head around charging the car and these sorts of things. We've all got to learn it, but once you've learned it, then you know it and it's easy. And so I'm hoping that helps to demystify the process to make you realize what the options are and why they're priced differently. It's just, for these reasons, like they're older or they charge slower or whatever it is, influences the price. And you just need to make sure you choose the right one because often when people complain about EVs, is because they didn't buy the right one. They didn't buy the one that fits with their use. And maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there were only sort of 20 options. So it was hard to find one for your particular situation. But now there's just loads of them. I can't even count the number of EVs that there are. Some of them are related to each other, but there's lots of different ones out there, with different battery sizes, different sizes of car. New ones are coming out all the time. So you just need to work out what one works for you. So yeah, loads of information out there. Make sure you listen to the right people, check out the reviews, and yeah, happy shopping.